We will get started in 1 minute. All right, it is now 7 o'clock, so we will begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Baekwon. I am a sophomore at North Creek High. I will be the speaker for today's lecture. This is Edward. Edward, can you introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, I'm Edward. I am a junior also at Northwick High. And if you have any questions about anything going on, feel free to send me a private message.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining our lecture. So before we begin, uh, basic class rules, just don't disturb the class and if you guys want to, you can take notes during the lecture. If you have questions, ask them in the chat box. Edward and I will try our best to answer them. If you don't get an answer, you can keep asking and, well, we'll try to keep up. So, first, let's begin. So, first of all, let's go over the units. I'm pretty sure you guys know all these units. These are the chronological periods and the exam waiting. So, it's very important to know what time everything occurred for essays in which they require you to get a context. That's one point. So usually you would try to write down, for example, what century something occurred in. And though it doesn't directly state that you will lose points for getting something wrong, it won't be counted as a context point. So do try to remember when everything happened. It's very important. And exam waiting. So if you guys haven't seen it before, here it is. As you can see, units 3 to 6 are more than the other ones. That doesn't mean the other ones aren't going to appear because in LEQs, often the three prompts are going to be from three separate time periods. But unit 3 to 6 will be more likely to be asked. And they also contain possibly more information. So, uh, yeah, let's continue. These are some themes that would go around in each of the units. Basically, this is basically like spice tea. If your guys' teacher has told you about spice tea, right? All of the different things. This isn't. If you guys want this, I can put a link to the PDF in here, uh, into the chat, which has all of this. Feel free to check that out. It has a lot of information, including what's on the next few slides. So these are basic topics. Of course, I'm assuming you guys have known this already. These are just what your teacher would talk about, right? What you have learned in every unit so far. For example, like Columbian Exchange in Unit 4. We will go over basic information and what you should know when you're writing an essay in the exam later after we finish all this exposition and stuff. So yeah, these also can be found in the PDF if you want to check that out. Same thing for this one. And you see, while like Unit 3, you see there's only 4 parts. Unit 9 looks like it's longer, but Unit 9 I think isn't actually as relevant in long essay questions or in DBQs as it is more current. And Unit 1, right? These two I think would appear maybe a bit less. All right, so let's begin. We'll be going over some topics in chronological order, starting from networks of exchange because we're kind of skipping over Unit 1. Unit 1 is sort of like the exposition to everything. It tells a lot about stuff like Confucianism, right? Daoism, but It's not going to be asked that much on long essay questions. We'll start with networks of exchange. That's a very common LEQ prompt. With the three, and we're going to start with Silk Road. As you can see on this image, the red lines indicate the Silk Road spans across all of Asia into the Middle East, and maybe a bit into Africa. It's a network of Eurasian trade routes active from the 2nd century BC till the mid 15th century, where it died out after the Ottoman Empire rose and sort of like blocked it off. So that's why, Columbus went and searched for Northwest Passage. That's also why maritime trades were flourished at that time because the Silk Road was cut off. It's 6,400 kilometers. It's a nice fun fact to know. And for the exams, it facilitated economic, cultural, political, religious interactions between the East and West. It got a lot of technology across as well. So that's very important to note, especially when, for example, DBQ prompts and LEQ prompts, they usually don't ask you like what this is. They usually ask you like effects of it or what happened due to this, what did it lead to? So you can say the trade led to interactions such as trading technology and spreading that. So yeah, the rise of Ottoman Empire and cutting the Silk Road off sort of marked the end of the Silk Road. So that's why it doesn't exist anymore. Next, the Trans-Saharan trade routes, as its name suggests, went across most of Africa and the Sahara. They were a network of trade routes that crossed the Sahara Desert in Africa, connecting the Mediterranean coast to West Africa. And um, this sort of map shows most of what went through. They traded many goods that were very valuable, such as gold, ivory, salt, and also slaves. The traders brought goods, ideas, technologies from one part of the world to another. Also, just like the Silk Road, it led to a spread of religions, language, and other cultural traditions. They were not only used by people in Africa, they were also used by the ancient Romans, the Arab empires, and European colonial powers in the 19th and 20th centuries. So it survived a bit longer than the Silk Road. So even though there were the development of more modern transportation systems, it's still a very important part of the economy and culture of the region. Overall, this trade network led to formation of diasporic communities, new technology, and spread of religion. And there's also a key figure, Mensa Musa, which he's very rich. And though we won't really talk about him here because we're not going to write essays about Mensa Musa on the exam. Lastly, the Indian Ocean trade. I think this was also shown in this picture, the blue line. It's a very important maritime trade route. It sort of went in as you can see here, it went under Asia. It's a key factor in East and West exchange throughout history, and long distance trade in this zone made, of course, people's cultures and just like the other trade routes go across from one end of the world to another. So it stretched from Southeast Asia to East and Southeast Africa, and then even the East Mediterranean, and yeah, cities and states on the Indian Ocean Rim focus on both sea and land trade. So yeah, that's the three main trade routes that you sort of need to remember for Unit 2 networks of exchange. Now we'll mildly talk about the Mongolian Empire. The Mongolian Empire, not sure if it's actually going to be a big part of the exam. There's definitely going to be questions about it, but usually we don't write essays about it. And especially because the Mongolian Empire is, what do you think? You think about its conquest, right? Conquest under Genghis Khan, right? He went across Asia, took a bit of Europe and the Middle East. He conquered all this place. The Mongolian Empire is the largest land-based empire in history. And but the thing about that is the exam questions on essays, they're not going to ask you to write an essay about how many people did Genghis Khan kill, what happened, what wars were fought. They're going to ask about maybe the effects, right? I once had a DBQ about does Genghis Khan's conquest, does the results justify it or no? Because once again, results usually and development is more important on essays. For example, some results, Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, right, and trade was uh, facilitated because the Silk Road was nearly dying before because of all the warring states and traders were like they're too afraid to go through this war zone. But now that all the warring states were gone, it's just one big empire. It actually flourished and it became even stronger now that it was being protected by the Mongolians. Of course, after Genghis Khan is split into Khanates, that's not going to be a big thing on LAQs or DBQs. It might be asked on SAQs, but yeah, it split and then it declined due to rebellions that began in China and spread around. So the Mongol Empire, right? It's the main thing that you need to know is its impacts, right? One of the documents that I once had was about Marco Polo going to China and saying, "Oh wow, look at all the technology. It's amazing." He's saying it's amazing, right? Does that justify its conquest and how many people they've killed? That's sort of the prompt that usually would go to the Mongol Empire. Anyway, now we'll be stepping out of this place. We'll go to the next topic, which is sort of caused, I mean, it's mainly caused by the trade routes. The Black Death, again, not going to be the main topic of a long essay because there's just not as much information to really talk about the Black Death. It could be used as a context point. It could be asked on an SAQ. But yeah, the Black Death, the bubonic plague, was a pandemic occurring in Europe from 1346 to 1353. And of course, you definitely do not need to remember these dates, but it is very helpful to know that it happened in the 1300s because, when you write context points, you should probably write down the time. So it's one of the most fatal pandemics in human history. As many as 50 million people perished, 30% to 50% of Europe's 14th century population. And that is a lot. So that is definitely a very, very impactful event that happened to Europe. And say, why did the trade routes cause this, right? Because not only are goods traded, there are also diseases, which we'll maybe talk about more in transoceanic connections. So after Genghis Khan conquered all of Asia and stuff, revived the Silk Road, not only were goods flowing again, there were also diseases. So it said that the diseases traveled via the Silk Road to Europe, and that's how it sort of started. So the plague also created religious and social economic upheavals with very profound effects on the course of European history. Next, the Crusades. Once again, not exactly sure if it's going to be a main topic of a long essay because in our class we touched on it maybe once or twice and then we didn't really talk about it again. However, it is good to know what they were in case you didn't happened from 1095 to 1291. Basically, religious wars between Christians and Muslims, in which they both want one place that is considered sacred and they fight for it. So there are 8 major Crusades expeditions, all that occurred within this time frame. Of course, you don't need to remember the exact time, but it is very helpful to remember what century occurred in if you want to use it in your essay. Yep. Next. Oh, this is very important and definitely, well, no, not definitely, but very well may be on your essay prompt. So the Columbian Exchange, because now we're stepping into Unit 4, I think. Yeah, Unit 4. So Christopher Columbus, right, he found the New World. He basically established this connection and a lot of goods were um, exchanged, such as horses, sugar plants, and disease to the New World. And to They also got sugar, tobacco, chocolate, and potatoes. So basically, that's a lot of things happened because this is two sides of the world, and both sides got a lot of stuff. So let's look at the impacts. The impacts on the old world, the Europe and the East. They got a lot of money from this. Spain got a lot of gold and silver, which it sounds like a good thing, but it's not a good thing because so much was brought back that led to inflation, which ultimately contributed to Spain's decline. We will talk about that in a bit. And then also animals and crops, which led to a more diverse diet and more nutrition. So animals such as turkeys were brought back, turkeys that aren't native to Europe. Like you don't see turkeys in Europe, you see turkeys in America. And well, they got turkeys. So crops, they brought back nutrition, so more people were born, and cash crops were also born. Not born, cash crops were grown in America and made lots of money. There were also medicine that was going by, and yeah, also disease. So the New World, what did they get? They got disease. 50% of the population of indigenous in America died due to diseases. And I think that is a very big thing. They were brought by conquistadors and their animals, and things like I think chickenpox and measles, the people over there, they didn't have any vaccines against it, right? Vaccines didn't exist. So yeah, a lot of people died. Animals that were brought here created overgrazing and soil erosion, also spread disease, and yeah, that's overall not good. Crops as well, deforestation. There was a lot of deforestation to make room for crops. Soil depletion from growing the same crops over and over, especially cash crops grown to benefit Europe. And those cash crops were grown not to benefit America, so that led to a system of forced labor and then to the transatlantic slave trade, which happened after most natives had perished. And about the same time was a lot of maritime development, like we mentioned before. Around this time, the Silk Road was completely dead after the Ottoman Empire sort of like shut it down, right? So that's why Columbus, when it was like, oh, I'm gonna find the Northwest Passage. So why did this even start, right? Wealth, because of wealth. More access to trade and goods after, Silk Road's gone. And then after he found this, he was like, they found silver, right? Silver is very, very important. In 1552, Spain had conquered the Inca Empire in the Americas. They took a lot of gold and mined a lot of silver, and all of this flowed into Spain. And by the late 16th century, about 80% of the world's gold and silver were in Spain. And that sounds good, right? That sounds good. But like we mentioned before, that had many effects, and most of them were not good. Prices in Spain rose very quickly because inflation was very serious. Luxury became very popular, and because Spain was so rich, they didn't develop their industry and they fell behind. And they had a lot of wars with England and other countries, which Spain would keep losing because, they didn't have a good industry. So Spain's wallet kept being drained by all of these wars, and all the other nations became richer. So Spain is basically a punching bag filled with coins. So later, gold and silver from Americas became less available because there is a limit. You're not going to keep mining forever. So after Spain started going broke, European banks demanded repayment, and that caused Spain to nearly collapse. So, uh, quick quiz. Do you guys remember? Quick question, just to make sure that you guys are following. When was w about what time did Columbus sort of when did he sort of explore this area? When did he set out to find the New World? You guys can answer in the chat and I'll look in. All right, very good answers, very good answers. Yeah, I think everybody's got it. So 1492 to 1502, 10 years of that. And yeah, so knowing the time is pretty nice. You could just know the basic around what time, right? Right? Like late 1400s or early 1500s. But yeah, it's very useful when you want to use it in context points. They do want to get maybe like a time frame of when everything happens. All right. Yeah, and we're going to talk about maritime exploration a bit more because that is itself a whole unit. So, why did it happen, right? Because, first of all, why do people want to continue on it if it's not just for trade? Why do people keep going? First of all, there's a lot of rivalry. All of the European states wanted to expand and they were trying to expand first. They kept seizing territories. Like Americas was taken so fast in all of the territories. They were just taken. It was like a market and everybody's was rushing for it. And then there's also religion because I'm sure people have heard, I'm sure you guys have all heard like stories of people going to America and then telling the natives like you should convert to Christianity and stuff like that. So European Christians were looking to convert others. Yeah, those were, I think, the two main reasons. Of course, trade is also there, but trade doesn't mean like exploration, right? You just go there and get the stuff and trade. So where did they go? So the next ones will be the main leaders in exploration. The main leader in exploration was Portugal. They went to Africa, India, South and Southeast Asia. Of course, that wasn't the New World, but that was more about trade. So Spain, though, was the ones who went around the world. They went to the Philippines and the Americas and established a link between the Americas and Asia across the Pacific Ocean. France didn't play as big as of a role on like colonialism, I guess. Did they traded fur, I think, and I don't think France has a huge role in this. Holland, they went to America. They technically founded New York City. Again, I don't think a huge role. And then England, right? So when you search up the largest land-based empire, it says Mongolia. But when you say the largest empire, most people, I mean, Google at least thinks it's Britain or England because they just established so many colonies, right? So many colonies. America and India, and also to have Canada. I think Canada's technically still there. And then also China, Zheng He also went very far. But I think he was introduced much before this time. All right, that is maritime exploration, so that's a lot to note down. But as long as you know most of like times where everybody went, what sort of countries did what, I think it should be fine. Yeah. Now, empires, right? Empires. I don't think there's much special information about empires, but here are gunpowder empires that will mostly be, I think these will be asked about on LAQs. I've done a practice exam and these were, I wrote one about them. The gunpowder empires, right? Gunpowder was actually getting used a lot. So these three, the Safavid, which was basically the Persian area, Mughal, the Indian area, and Ottoman. Turkey, yeah, and we did mention Ottoman a few times before. They cut off the Silk Road, right? So the empires, there's not really much to say about them, but I do find them frequently asked about on SAQs, and especially about their rule, such as, for example, how did Akbar the Great, I think Akbar the Great, how did he rule, right? Was he religiously tolerant or something, right? So. The empires as a whole, maybe they'll ask you to explain how they developed and what led to them becoming empires on LAQ. But as for short answer questions, I think they will ask more about their leaders. I also got one about Peter the Great in Russia and how he used religion to sort of consolidate rule. We won't talk about empires a lot because they're just empires. I don't. They have these they have rulers and the information on empires isn't very like key. All you gotta do is just remember basically what type of people they are. Like for example, the Safavids and Ottomans, they are different types of Muslims and they often have wars. I think that's very common to show up on MCQs, I think. Yeah. and their rulers, right? Try to remember some key rulers. I don't think the Manchu really had a significant ruler, but the other ones definitely will be sort of asked. Moving on. So the Magna Carta. Do you guys? I'm not sure if you guys really are familiar with this. Are you guys familiar with what it is? Yeah, it's not something that's often going to be like. I don't think this might will even like show up on the MCQ, but uh, yeah, it is like one of the first pieces of document that actually like sort of. I think maybe you can consider it like the earliest part of Enlightenment ideas, maybe, because it's issued on, well, 1215 was the first document to put into writing that the king and government were not above law. So basically, like evil tyrants, they don't want evil tyrants, right? Evil tyrants are horrible, they're cruel and stuff. So it was sought to prevent the king from exploiting his power and place limits on royal authority by establishing law as a power in itself. So it separated the monarchy and law, basically trying to seek some sort of like fairness and not let the people be oppressed so much, not let the people suffer because that's what happened, right? That's what happened when there's a cruel tyrant. A cruel tyrant doesn't care about his people. He just cares about getting what he wants, and the Magna Carta sort of stopped that. So I found that this is a very useful piece of context you could use, especially when you talk about empires or the Enlightenment. Yeah, but it's not going to be really talked about on the exam specifically. I don't think it's going to have an MCQ question, but it is a good thing to remember. All right, we're finally beginning to go into the later periods, starting from the Renaissance. It's a period in history and a cultural movement marking the transition from Middle Ages to modernity. It began in the Italian region, in the Republic of Florence, and spread throughout Europe. So its time was the 15th and 16th centuries. It was characterized by an effort to revive and surpass the ideas and achievements of classical antiquity. It was associated with great social changes in most fields and disciplines, including art, architecture, politics, literature, exploration, and science. And you often see these paintings that are like called Renaissance paintings, from that time. There's a lot of paintings from there. So its intellectual basis was its version of humanism, derived from the concept of Roman humanities and the rediscovery of classical Greek philosophy. So this the Renaissance will, I think it is very likely to get its own essay question, but personally back then I didn't know too much about it, so I skipped it. Renaissance is because it's more about like cultural, artistic, and well, not artistic, but it's mostly about cultural movements and um, yeah, that's a lot different than some of the other events such that are more straightforward. Like a bubonic plague is you know exactly what it is. You know what an empire, you know what the Ottoman Empire is into. Renaissance is more of like a movement, a cultural movement, which personally I found that a bit, harder to remember. Anyways, after that, the scientific revolution. It's a bit smaller compared to the ones that followed, which it was the Industrial Revolution. But during the 16th and 17th centuries, it's the name given to a period of drastic change in scientific thought. So, the Greek view of nature had dominated the science thinking field for over 2,000 years, and it just replaced it. And it was characterized by emphasis on abstract reasoning, quantitative thought, understanding how nature works. Oh, my bad, I tried to scroll down. The view of nature as a machine, development of experimental, etc. So this one, scientific revolution would be probably asked as an SAQ, but because most of the essays are really centered around for like developments, I think would be more on the Industrial Revolution, which we'll get to in a bit. So, next we will go into what we, oh, Enlightenment. I think enlightenment is basically the whole point of Unit 6, I think, Unit 6. The Age of Enlightenment, also known as the Age of Reason, was intellectual and philosophical movement that occurred in Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. It's preceded by the Scientific Revolution. So basically, this is where thinkers started thinking, right? They started thinking what was going on, why do we do stuff? Like John Locke, he's a very famous guy. He thought the social contract about like how governments and laws and people. So a lot of social ideas centered around values of knowledge were found in rationalism, right? People thinking logically instead of just not thinking, I guess. And political ideas such as natural law, liberty, oh, especially liberty. That's the Enlightenment is basically like a prelude to all of the revolutions that sort of happened, because the Enlightenment sort of gave these people these ideas that we can be free. We don't need to be oppressed. And yeah, that's why I stated the Magna Carta before. So it was almost like a prelude to it. So a variety of 19th century movements, including liberalism, socialism, and neoclassicism, trace their intellectual heritage to the Enlightenment, right? Um, so we have a list of people here that are very important. Do you guys, which of these do you guys recognize and what do you know them for? We can discuss a bit about the ones that you guys know and a bit about the other ones. So of course, yeah, democracy. I think John Locke is one of the ones that are, John Locke is he's a very famous guy, even in AP World History students. He's probably the one that everybody knows. Democracy, a lot of democracy, right? Because before this, all of it was monarchy, right? Mm. Also remember Mary Wollstonecraft. Oh yeah. Mm. A lot of thinking in this era, right? Everybody was smart thinkers. Mary Wollstonecraft actually was one of the start of woman rights and sort of, well, it didn't really occur until much later in Unit 9, but was one of the starters. Who was So Adam Smith was he's a Scottish I guess we can say philosopher. He's the capitalism guy. He's the guy that founded capitalism, right? Last year we often compared him to Karl Marx, who was like the father of communism and socialism. Smith is the one that started capitalism, laissez-faire, you know. All right. So we will move on from the Enlightenment. Basically, these guys are all pretty important, but sometimes you don't need to mention all of them. You can, if you're writing an essay about, for example, effects of enlightenment, you could just use one of them as a context on a long essay because they don't ask about specific people, right? Long essay questions don't ask about who were the Enlightenment thinkers, what did they do? They ask about what led up to them Enlightenment, what happened, what did the Enlightenment sort of cause. So yeah, you can remember these people and what they did vaguely for a context point, and I don't think you need to know everything about them. That's more for like maybe a research project or something. All right, Industrial Revolution. I got a question on last year, and I was so glad I studied. Industrial Revolution is, well, first of all, it's a very long topic because there is two, and those two are pretty different. I don't think the AP exam really needs you to distinguish between the two unless it's on the SAQ. But what it is, basically, I think you guys know about this. We've been learning the Industrial Revolution since forever. It was the transition from creating goods by hand to using machines, right? We have like they made that sewing machine thingy. They also sort of changed farming to automated, Beginning in Great Britain, the Industrial Revolution spread through Europe and even to the United States from the period 1760 to about 1820 to 1840. It was divided by the First Industrial Revolution and the Second Industrial Revolution, and it was a period of global transition um, from human economy to efficient, stable manufacturing that happened after the agricultural revolution. So, quick quiz. Do you guys know what's the difference between the first industrial revolution and the second one? What's a key difference between them? Like if this was an MCQ, what would you, well, no, not MCQ. If it was an SAQ asking what's the difference, what would it be? So besides like what they sort of used and produced, what was the main thing? Mhm. Right, I think the first one mostly was focused on like advancing in a lot of things such as they yes, child labor. Very, very nice. I mean not nice child labor, but you know, they did use a lot of child labor back then. We I hope we don't have a lot of child labor now, but you know, maybe it still exists. But yeah, that's something that definitely is I don't know. It might be asked on the SAQ. I once got SAQ about with a picture of children working in a factory and asked about how the Industrial Revolution led to bad health and stuff. Yeah, steam engine, right? The first one, like that's a lot of fossil fuels used in the first one. The first one did have a lot of advancements. The second one focused more on like electricity and if I were to like describe it, I would say the second one's more like quality of life changes. They had lights and like more I guess it made people live better. The first one was solely about changing goods by hand to machines. And they had a lot of factories, a lot of factories. So right now, the revolutions, right? After the Industrial Revolution and after the Enlightenment, the Enlightenment is very, very crucial to this part because that's something that causes all this, right? Because before nobody really thought of freedom, right? Nobody was like, oh, we have this thing called liberty. But no. But now, well, after like what John Locke and like all the other guys they told them that wow they do have liberty so revolutions right that's how American started so new shifts in ideology emphasizing reason over tradition basically the Enlightenment sort of made them rethink so um the North I mean wait let's just go through them and actually, before we begin, we can sort of just everybody can say maybe something that you remember from these revolutions. What do you guys remember? Try to not just talk about the American Revolution because we have studied that before, right? In what, seventh grade, we've talked, maybe not seventh grade, like eighth grade, seventh grade, we talked about the American Revolution. What's something you guys remember from all of these? Well, no, just maybe like one of them. Okay, not the Russian Revolution. We're not talking about the Russian Revolution yet. That's much later. Mhm. Yes, it was very bloody. The Russian Revolution is even though they're all revolutions, right? But that one's much later. Mhm. They did behead him. A lot of beheading going on in France. Well, the French one was rather bloody. I think that's for a fact, and it went on for a long time and still didn't succeed in the end because of Napoleon. Yes. All right. Very good contributions, everybody. I'm so proud of this group. usually nobody really likes to talk. But anyway, let's begin. North American revolutions. I think the American Revolution, I think you guys all have a basic idea of it. 1775 to 1783, they had the Declaration of Independence using John Locke's ideas, and then the whole war that was fought with Britain and helped by France. I think everybody has a basic idea on that. It's pretty hard to forget it. But the other ones, I think, besides French, the other ones are a bit harder to remember. There's also oh wait, there's one more in North American. There was the Creole Revolution with Simon Bolivar with that letter. I think that letter is sometimes used in DBQs and SAQs as document slash evidence. Yeah, there's revolutions against the Spanish rule and stuff. In Latin America, there was the Haitian Revolution, as mentioned before. It was the uprising of slaves and escape slaves against their masters and revolution for independence. And it was very, very successful. It's the first country in Latin America to gain independence. There's also the Philippines, which won't be really talked about. We can just know that that happened. But in Europe, the French Revolution is commonly talked about. Like I once had to practice LEQ that said, "Oh, name like what the effects or causes of a revolution, not including the American one," because everybody knows the American Revolution. So it's good to know a bit more about French because I think that's relatively easier to remember. In 1789, there was the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, inspired by the Declaration of Independence. Wait, no, that was yeah, Declaration of Independence, and there was another one. Yeah. In 1792, they established the First French Republic, and in 1804, it was shut down by Napoleon, and he takes over and declares himself Emperor of France. And then 1815, he was defeated at Waterloo. So Napoleon is very important. um, I mean, you could talk all day about beheading the kings, but if you do talk about the French Revolution, I think it's very nice if you could add in Napoleon because he did play a very crucial role in this. So they did want a lot of liberty, mostly because of unfairness, just like in the American Revolution, right? That's what causes all of this. Lastly, there's also the unification movement in Italy and Germany with Otto von Bismarck and the Ottoman Empire. So. Yeah. Okay, after one sec. So next, after revolutions, we have another key 7 Years' War. You guys know who fought in this war, right? Yeah, it's written right here. But um, do you guys what do you guys know that isn't written on here about the 7 Years' War? This is a I don't think this won't will be talked about a lot, but it's good background info to know, especially for context, especially in when you talk about the American Revolution, right? Right. Who won that war? Do you guys know? Oh, one sec, my tab was minimized. Who won that war? Hmm. Right. Yeah, okay. Everybody knows it's the British, but so but how did that war what were its effects? And right, so oh, how do you guys how do you guys know how it led to the American Revolution? Because they call it the 7 Years' War. It was a very brutal war and they did lose a lot of money, right? Because going to war always means you lose money. And so that's usually done by, reparations. Well, that was in World War II, but mm, they taxed the Americans, right? Because the British, they won the war. They lost a lot of money. That's that's what happens when you go to war, right? You lose stuff in wars. You don't, I mean, you win wars, but you always lose money. Exactly. They were broke, so they taxed their colonies. And so because they were so out of money, they taxed egregious amounts. And that sort of yes, no taxation without representation. Yeah, that's one of the yeah, that's probably gonna be asked in the SAQ. They might show you like a poster of American Revolution and ask you, oh, what led to this? Why did they get taxed? Why are they saying this? Right? So we can always trace back to the Seven Years' War in which the British lost so much money that they had to resort to taxing their colonies and ended up uh, sort of making their colonies mad, which ended up in a pretty humiliating defeat when, they lost against 13 small itty bitty colonies. So yeah, I guess you could call it a global conflict because they did have all of Europeans great powers. Of course, all in Europe was basically the globe back then because besides Europe, nowhere else was strong enough or relevant enough. Because you see, in Asia, right? They weren't really too connected, and Americas weren't that strong either. So yeah. The Eastern countries sort of fell behind the Western countries at the start of the Industrial Revolution. So, facing challenges from the West, different countries took different actions and different results. Next, we will talk about the triangular trade after the 7 year. Okay, as for the 7 Years' Wars, this might be on an SAQ, maybe. It won't be on. You're not gonna write an essay about this, of course. It's not. It's very briefly talked about, but in all of the information above, right? Something that is very commonly asked would be the revolutions, and if they allow you to write about the American Revolution, right? You're gonna need that context point. You're gonna write down about. You're gonna write about the how they lost so bad that they had to tax everything. Anyway, before we continue on to the next part, I do want to talk about a bit Japan and China and China's Qing Dynasty about the Perry Expedition. Do you guys know what the Perry Expedition is? Does anybody know what the Perry Expedition is? Yes. Right, we talked about maritime trade, right? So they wanted to trade. Remember, why was the New World found, right? Why did Columbus even set out? Because he wanted to find a different way to trade with China and India and that side because the Silk Road was closed off. And that's still a goal. They didn't give up on that just because they found America, right? So the Perry expedition, nicknamed the Arrival of the Black Ships, was well, in name it was diplomatic, but technically it was a military expedition in two separate voyages from the first one from 1852 to 1853 and then 1854 to 1855 to the Tokugawa Shogunate in Japan by warships of the United States Navy. The goal of this expedition included exploration, surveying, and establishment of diplomatic relations because at this time, Japan was uh they were in isolation, right? They didn't contact with the outside world, and U.S. wanted to trade, Japan didn't. So what happened? Commanded by Commodore Matthew Perry, the expedition went to Japan, and their goal was to force an end to Japan's 220-year-old policy of isolation and to open up the Japanese ports to American trade. And if they didn't, they had gunboats, so they had a huge navy. Well, probably not as big as like British huge, but they had a pretty good navy. So. The Perry expedition led directly to the establishment of diplomatic relations between Japan and the Western great powers, and eventually to the collapse of the ruling Tokugawa shogunate and the restoration of the emperor. Following the expedition, their trade routes with the world led to the cultural trend of basically they had Japanese culture influence art around the world. It's what happens in trade, right? Like the trade we mentioned before, all of them, not they don't just trade stuff, they also bring technology, they bring culture, they bring religion all around the world. So yeah. And also, we're gonna quickly talk about the Meiji Restoration. I think it's a pretty big part. Basically, in 1868, the Tokugawa shogun, who ruled Japan in the feudal period, lost his power, and the emperor was restored. And as emperor took the name Meiji, which means enlightened rule, as his reign name. So it's, that's that event was the Meiji Restoration. Also, there's the Treaty of Nanjing, August 29th, 1842, the treaty that ended the First Opium War, of course. This is all like maritime trade between America, Europe, and Asia. So the Treaty of Nanjing is the treaty that ended the First Opium War with the first of unequal treaties between China and foreign imperialist powers. So this is all about like imperialism and stuff, which yeah, that happened a lot because of maritime trade and people going around and seeing these places that, oh, they have stuff we want, but we don't have anything for that. Do you guys, here's a quick question. Why was why did the opium trade start? Why did they decide to trade opium to China? Mhm. Equal balance of trade. Yes. So after they because since the 13th century and stuff, since the times of the Silk Roads, yes, tech basically, yeah, opium is drugs. But what happened? Everybody loves Chinese products, right? They love silk and tea and porcelain. But the thing is, China was doing just fine in isolation. They really didn't need anything that the British or anything the European countries were offering, right? They don't have anything they want. Meanwhile, China has everything that the British want. So what do? Um they make a demand in which they sell drugs, basically. Because that's something that now the Chinese people need, and they need to start trading. So that's what they do. So yeah, continuing with the Opium Wars, China paid the British and a lot of money and the sea of the territory of Hong Kong, and agreed to establish a fair and reasonable tariff. But was it really fair? Like I mean, it's not gonna be really fair. The British merchants who had previously been allowed to trade at only Guangzhou were now permitted to trade at five treaty ports and with whoever they please. And the treaty was supplemented in 1843 by the British Supplementary Treaty of the Bogue, which allowed British citizens to be tried in British courts and granted Britain any rights in China that China might grant to other countries. So really, it's not really fair. So yeah, so we did talk a lot about Asia, and um I think this is a big part that may be on possibly DBQ and LEQ, but it won't really ask specifically. Like they're not gonna talk about how did the Opium War go down? They're not gonna talk about that. And I really don't think they're gonna say like what were the causes and effects of the Opium War, because that's not long enough to be like a DBQ. That might be a SAQ. But what they will talk about in like long essay questions is imperialism. Imperialism is a big part of the later units in AP World History. So they'll probably talk about like how did imperialism affect states and places in Asia, what happened, why certain things happened. So yeah, they're not gonna talk about just the Meiji Restoration. They're not gonna just talk about the Perry Expedition. They're not gonna just talk about the Treaty of Nanjing, but they will talk a lot about um, imperialism, which yeah, that's something that you should definitely remember. Also about these dates, about like in the near late 1800s to the early 1900s. This is like the prelude to well, it's a bit before the World Wars, which we'll get to later. All right, and we have about 6 minutes left. I won't continue on to the next part because the next part is a bit longer. So yeah, now we'll have. I'll stop sharing my screen. We'll have Edward sort of give. Well, no, Edward, it's your turn. You can introduce what you're gonna do.
All right, so I'm sure you guys have I hope that you guys have at least started like preparing for your free responses, your by at least doing some practice tests. If you have done that, feel free to like send me like to share a Google Doc with me, and then I will give you any feedback on it. I will grade you it. Let me put my email in chat real quick. Yeah. So if you want any feedback of your things like your DBQs, your LEQs, your SAQs, put it onto a Google document and then share it to that email, like write it down so you can remember. And then if you guys like need any ideas of like where to start, like what I'd recommend you do is try looking at some of the old practice exams, right? Like here, I'll send it. Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll send that one in chat, right? I've been scrolling through this one a little bit, and then I see that the first SAQ is sort of about something that we've talked about, right? It's about the gunpowder empires. And then this is also going to be like in general very good test practice because like these are the ones that were on the test last year, so you can expect like similar trends, right? And then typically what they do is the topics next year are going to be different from the topics like the year before, right? So this year, the DBQ from last year was about the Soviet Union. So and China and how like communism affected it. So next year it is likely not going to be in that time period. So keep that in mind. Maybe like they start repeating like the same prompts in every time period, like once every like 3 to 4 years, like a cycle like that. And then yeah. So yeah, just feel free to do any of the practice tests, like the free responses of any time periods. Just make sure, like if you do like a DBQ or any of the writing ones, include the prompt in the document so I can know what to look for. And then try to also put like a picture of the rubric, like the official AP rubric. You can find it online in the document as well, so I can put it there. And then make sure to give me like suggesting like commenting access so I can make sure to leave feedback. Do not make me like just a viewer. Give me commenting. Yeah. But that is all I have for you guys today. And tomorrow, if we have like a little bit more extra time, we can go through a few practice multiple choice questions and then I'll like walk you guys through how to like properly like answer them.
Yeah, also we do have if we have some time on Tuesday, we can also go over some FRQs, right? Yes. Yeah. All right. So lastly, before we end this off, I mean, I think we can give a few more tips if you guys want to get started on that essay. So especially for DBQs, I personally think DBQs are rather easy to get points, right? So the rubrics, um, they basically just want you to use everything, well, most of the things that were in the documents. They want you to use a lot of them for the evidence. And since the DBQs already provide you with seven, right? Yeah, 7 documents. So they provide you with basically everything you need for both sides of the argument in your essay because they give prompts like, did the so and so empire, did their colonialism or conquest positively impact or impact? And there's sources for both. So basically, the only thing that you sort of need to remember for these essay writing would probably be outside evidence and well, that's for DBQs only, and context because um the context, right? These are both things you need to remember. Outside evidence, um, that's probably just to show that you have a basic understanding of the topic that is being asked, such as last year's was about communism. You could write an outside evidence about the 5-year plans, which wasn't in one of the documents. And contextualization, you do need to make sure that you actually know what this event is, not just about it. You need to know what happens before, maybe, because they want you to sort of show that you actually understand the content. So as for DBQs, they give a lot of the times on top. They always have a source on top of every document. So for context, I think it would be easy to find if you could just if you read through all of them. So yeah, those are some things you should probably remember because I'm not gonna lie, last year I kind of nearly forgot. I nearly forgot to write outside evidence because I just wrote context. But it's okay. It's okay. It was I did fine because I did communism is something that is relatively easier to remember because there's only two main things. It's just China and Soviet, and they were pretty similar. Anyways, we are at 8 o'clock, so that will be all for today. Thank you all for showing up. If you have any more questions, you can stay back and I'll make it so you can unmute and you can ask out loud if you wish. Edward and I will be here for a bit longer, and then, yeah, well, that's the end of today. So if you have any questions, you can either ask them in the chat or out loud. Yeah, have a great day, guys.